In this video, I'm going to show you the 5 things that you're doing to cause and perpetuate arguments and what you can do to stop them. And make sure you do stick around until the end, because I'll be walking you through the 5 steps to master conversations every single time. And as someone with ADHD, I have spent over 30 years of my life as an absolute masterclass in what not to do. I've caused arguments, I've perpetuated arguments, involved in shouting matches. It's taken me decades of failure for me to finally shift how to communicate and how to stop arguments from destroying all of my relationships. So it's a common phrase that the key to healthy relationships is communication. If you master communication, then you can overcome any challenge. The problem comes that when things get heated, our partner says something we disagree with, or we feel attacked, or even something as simple as feeling tired, our natural default wiring kicks in. Our lizard brain tells us that there is a danger, and we can react in ways that not only kill the conversation, but actively damage the relationship itself. And our default response usually ends up in one of 5 main responses. I've organized these into a nice acronym for you under the term GRADE. So these fatal responses are gaslighting, rebutting, avoiding, defending, and explaining. And these are the 5 responses that are guaranteed to derail any conversation. So let's go through these one by one. So first up, gaslighting. Obviously, gaslighting through social media is often spoken about in the most extreme examples. But gaslighting is essentially actively lying, saying something isn't true, making people question their memory or perception or judgment. Gaslighting is effectively trying to convince someone something didn't happen. So for example, when you say, I didn't say that, or that never happened, or it didn't happen that way. And like I said, oftentimes we're fed the idea that if someone gaslights, then they are some sort of sociopath or dangerous narcissist. But the reality is that there are a whole spectrum of reasons why people can gaslight. People do this when they feel insecure, when they are responding to a specific situation that they don't feel comfortable in, or simply trying to avoid any confrontation. And even in the instances when we do gaslight, it can feel like we're right when we're saying it. But essentially what happens is that this shows our partners that we are only open to one perspective, which is our own. And even if it isn't your intent to lie specifically, in being so stuck in your own perspective, you're creating a bubble of your own reality. And that is very actively damaging to not only the conversation, but also relationship as a whole. The next up is rebutting. So rebutting is when you are presenting a contradicting or different point of view. So there's nothing inherently wrong with presenting your own point of view, but as someone with ADHD, it can be specifically shooting down an idea or an opinion without listening to the original point. This can be cutting someone off, for example, using our impulsivity to jump in with our own opinion. And it can come across as very aggressive, and ultimately it deflects away from the original point that your partner is making. And again, this destroys the conversation. Next up is avoiding. Avoiding is when you shut conversation down completely. So things such as stonewalling or silent treatment or ghosting, walking into another room. This is essentially stopping the conversation altogether. It's very, very passive. And ultimately, in doing this, it shows that you're not ready to hear tough truths, a different opinion, any sort of perspective other than your own. And it creates more distance between you, your partner, and any sort of potential solution. And again, this destroys the conversation. Defending or getting defensive. That's when you act like someone has attacked you. And usually defending is standing up for yourself and justifying what you've done. It feels very powerful in the moment, but actually it's a very, very weak action. Because when you get defensive and act like you're having to defend yourself, it's ultimately playing the victim card. It's showing you as feeling threatened or unable to take any sort of criticism. When you try to defend your actions, it's trying to use logic when you're talking about emotion. Explaining, it's similar to defending, but explaining is basically using your words to talk about why your partner is wrong. You explain why the feelings that they're feeling are wrong, why their perspective that they're explaining to you is incorrect. It's explaining why you're right. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with trying to explain a situation, but the timing and the way that it's done is very, very crucial. Because when somebody approaches you with something, they're often coming from an emotional perspective, and you're trying to use logic in order to explain away their feelings, telling them why their feelings are not justified. Explaining is essentially giving a lecture to an audience who are there for a completely different subject. So why do none of these things work? Essentially, they all try to manipulate the conversation. And this may sound very harsh, but the underlying idea of all of these is to not talk about the subject that is being raised, but actually to talk about a different subject in raising a different point and raising a different perspective rather than listening and taking on board the original point of the conversation. Ultimately, crucial conversations are about emotions. They're not about logic. So when somebody approaches you with something that is from an emotional perspective and you try to change the conversation away, this breaks the emotional trust between you and your partner. It shows your partner that you are not ready to have that conversation. And in that sense, it shows them that when they approach you with their feelings, they're going to get a negative response. And then what happens is this leads to negative feedback loops. So this is the negative feedback loop that happens. Your partner expresses their feelings to you. You justify, explain, defend, etc. Then your partner feels unheard. They don't feel like you understand. They don't feel like you're there to listen. They don't feel very safe in expressing what they're expressing to you. So then they start to keep more and more of their feelings inside. But because of that, their feelings build up even more into stronger feelings because they're unable to express them anymore. And then it gets to a certain point where they need to express their feelings. They can't keep them bottled up inside anymore. And then they express them again. And then you respond in an even bigger way because you find their expression completely unreasonable. So you respond in an even bigger way, more justification, more logic, more shouting, etc. And then your partner feels even more unheard. And over time, this cycle, this negative feedback loop gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And because it's a negative feedback loop, it requires one person to break that. So by removing these 5 responses from your repertoire, this will empower you to stop that negative feedback loop from happening. So these responses actually cause more arguments. You become part of the problem. And even if, let's say you feel like your partner's expression was very unjustified, you're actually adding to the problem. You're making the problem worse by your response itself. So you cause more arguments, you destroy more emotional safety between you and your partner, and it causes more and more damage to the relationship, unneeded damage. Essentially, what you're trying to do is argue feelings with logic. So when your partner's coming to you with their feelings, you're trying to argue against it with what you feel is logic. And what you end up doing is you're speaking 2 different languages. You're not learning the language of emotions. So what can we do about this? Well, there are 5 steps. The first one is changing your default. So your default reaction, your response, is not necessarily always the right response. People say go with your gut, but oftentimes our gut acts emotionally, right? So getting into a different default, getting into a different mindset and seeing these conversations as something different, as opportunities, not attacks, this is changing your default to conversations. The next step is to learn to manage your emotions. So when it comes to these conversations, managing your own emotions is the most important thing. Listening to your own feelings, recognizing the patterns that you feel during those moments is key. So if you're feeling anger, resentment, fear, discomfort, mistrust in these moments, you are still in charge of your actions. So you can choose to not respond in the default way, to not respond in the negative, toxic way. Because if you're feeling those emotions in the moment, this will always come across in the way that you speak with your partner. And if you do want to learn more about how to develop these skills to focus and manage your ADHD, then I invite you to join me on the free Focus Bootcamp, where I show you the tools that myself and other Ultra Normal members use every single day. Click on the link in the description down below. The next thing is to be a data collector. So in these moments, when you're getting negative feedback or you're getting feelings or opinions that you may not necessarily agree with in the moment, you can put that aside to simply be there to collect data, to collect information, to collect feelings about the person that you care about the most. In these crucial conversations, these are about your partner's feelings. These are about their expressions. These are about what their perspectives are. So you can simply be there to listen, to collect data, to understand your partner better. Even if your partner is attacking you or partner is saying hurtful things, this is all information that can be used to improve the relationship. When we hear tough truths and we get the gut reaction to reject them or defend ourselves, it doesn't make those feelings less true on our partner's behalf. Next is learn how to validate, but not just validate externally, internally as well. So I have a whole video on validation, so I'll link to it above. But validating internally what your partner is saying to you is essentially taking the time to process what they're saying and understand why they came to the conclusions and the feelings and the thoughts that they're having. So internally empathizing, understanding and validating the thought processes that led to the feelings and their expression. You know, your partner is not insane. They have real feelings, they have real thoughts and ideas that they're trying to express. So learning to understand how they formulated those ideas will help you validate their thought process internally. And then once you're able to process it internally, then it's much easier to externally validate it. So when you externally validate those thoughts and feelings, you're taking the time to verbally express and show that you fully understand them. This is just a skill. When you learn how to do this, your partner will have less of a need to feel like they need to forcefully express something to you. In arguments and discussions, your behavior actually has a huge impact on your partner's behavior. So if you're negatively reacting, then it's more likely that your partner will negatively react. This negative feedback loop that can be perpetuated. But when you break that negative feedback loop and you learn to validate, then over time, it shows your partner that you're actually there to take the time to understand and listen. And it means that your partner needs to less forcefully express the feelings and the thoughts that they're having. Giving them the emotional safety to express themselves will also give them time to name and tame their own emotions. And if you want to know more about emotions and how emotions work, then take a look at my video on ADHD and emotions for a deeper dive. And then after all of this, then you can express your thoughts, your opinions, your point of view, but only after you've done the first 4 steps. If you're jumping in with your thoughts and opinions before doing the first 4 steps, then essentially what you're doing is one of the 5 responses that we spoke about at the start of the video. And this takes time and practice. This is not something that's going to change overnight, but it's really important to develop these skills proactively so that when crucial conversations come up, your natural default will be to respond in a more effective way that actually helps the relationship and grows the relationship rather than adding more damage and destroying more and more of the safety that your partner needs to feel. And if you want to learn more about ADHD and communication, then I will leave you with a video right here. I'll see you over there.